What if I told you that the most beautiful, perfect-looking pool on the river is probably holding very few active fish? And what if I told you the real honey hole, the spot crammed with hungry predators, is a barely visible line on the water you've been ignoring for years? Today, we are talking about the single most overlooked feature on any river or stream, the subtle current seam. By the end of this video, you will see the water in a completely new way. You'll finally understand why you've been casting just a few feet away from where all the real action is happening. This isn't about a new magic lure, it's about a fundamental shift in your approach that will put more fish in your net. So let me ask you, do you believe there are invisible spots that hold almost all the fish? Let me know in the comments, and let's get into it. For generations, we've been taught to fish the obvious spots. Your dad or grandpa probably pointed to a big fallen tree, a deep hole on the outside bend, or the white water behind a huge boulder. And they weren't wrong. Those places can certainly hold fish. This has conditioned us to look for large, obvious structures. We arrive at the river, our eyes scan for the biggest, most dramatic features, and we start casting. The problem is, every other angler is doing the exact same thing. More importantly, while these spots offer cover, they aren't always where fish are actively feeding. The real secret lies in understanding the subtle, almost invisible differences in water speed. It's about seeing the river not as a collection of spots, but as a network of currents, and the most productive zones are the borders between them. First, what exactly is a current seam? Let's make it simple. A seam is the border where two currents of different speeds meet. Imagine two conveyor belts right next to each other, one moving fast and one moving slow. The line where they touch is the seam. On a river, you see the obvious ones all the time. The calm water behind a big rock meets the main, fast-moving current. That's a seam. But we are going deeper than that. We are looking for the subtle ones, the seams created by a small change in the river bottom, or where a slight current from a bay meets the main river flow. These are the spots 99% of people paddle or walk right past. These are our target zones. So, let's understand why these seams even form. It's all about simple physics and something called friction. Water flowing in a river is constantly interacting with its environment. The riverbed, the banks, rocks, logs, even weeds. They all slow down the water that touches them. This creates different layers and lanes of current moving at different speeds. The fastest water is typically near the surface in the middle of the channel, away from all that friction. The slowest water is along the bottom and the banks. A seam is simply the visible result of these speed differences. A submerged log doesn't just block water, it creates a slower lane behind it that runs parallel to the faster main current, forming a perfect fish-holding seam. Now, let's look at this from the fish's point of view. Why is this seam so attractive? For a predatory fish like a bass, trout, or walleye, a seam is a free lunch delivery service. The faster current is a conveyor belt, carrying a constant supply of food. Insects, bait fish, crawfish, you name it. The slower current, right next to it, is a resting area. It's a place where the fish can hold its position without burning a ton of energy. Think about it. The fish can sit calmly in the slow lane, watch the food pass by in the fast lane, and then dart out a few inches to grab a meal before returning to its resting spot. It's the most efficient way to feed. This brings us to the most important concept, energy conservation. A fish's entire life revolves around a simple calculation, gaining more energy from food than it spends to get it. A fish that has to fight a heavy current all day long is burning calories. It's wasting precious energy. But a fish that positions itself on the edge of a seam is a master of efficiency. It's the equivalent of you sitting on your couch and having a pizza delivery drone drop food right into your hand. They are lazy predators by nature, and the seam is the laziest, most effective feeding position they can find. This is why these seams are not just holding a few fish. They are holding all the active feeding fish. So, how do you actually spot your first subtle seam? The key is to stop looking at the water as a single entity and start looking for differences in its texture. Stand on the bank and just watch for a few minutes. Don't even cast. Look for a line where the water on one side appears slightly more riffled or faster, and the water on the other side looks smoother, slicker, or glassy. Sometimes it's a very faint line, It might look like a faint wrinkle on the surface. That wrinkle is the seam. It's telling you that something underwater, a rock, a dip in the bottom, a log, is changing the speed of the current. Once you train your eye to see these texture changes, you will start seeing them everywhere. One of the easiest seams to spot is what I call the glass-off seam. This is common behind any object that breaks the current, big or small. You'll see the main flow of the river moving along, and then you'll see a patch of much calmer, almost glassy-looking water right next to it. That edge, where the turbulent water meets the calm water, is a prime feeding lane. Anglers often make the mistake of casting right into the middle of the calm water. The fish aren't usually in the dead center of it. They are right on the edge, using that calm water as cover and watching the seam for their next meal. Your cast should land just into the faster water and drift naturally right along that edge. Let's talk about the bubble line. Think of it as nature's neon sign, pointing directly to the fish. When you see a distinct line of foam or small bubbles tracking downstream, you are not just looking at surface debris. You are looking at the exact meeting point of two different currents. That line is the seam. Imagine you're a big trout. You can sit just inside the slow water, barely moving a fin, and watch that conveyor belt drift by right on the edge of that bubble line. It's the perfect ambush spot. So many anglers see that foam and think nothing of it. But from now on, when you see a bubble line, I want you to see a dinner table. It is one of the easiest visual cues to spot, and it almost always holds fish. Some of the most productive seams are the ones you can't see the cause of. These are the seams created by submerged structure. You might be looking at a seemingly uniform stretch of river, but you notice a subtle line or a patch of slightly different textured water. This is a massive clue. It's telling you that underneath the surface, there's a rock pile, a sunken log, or a drop-off. These features are creating a current break that fish are using, but because other anglers can't see the structure itself, they completely ignore the spot. Learning to identify these invisible seams is like having X-ray vision. You're fishing structure that nobody else even knows is there. This leads to a higher level skill, reading the river bottom from the surface. The water's surface is a map of what lies beneath. A smooth, even flow often indicates a flat, sandy or muddy bottom with little structure. When you see boils, eddies, or standing waves, that's a sign of rocks or an uneven bottom. A V shape on the surface pointing downstream means water is flowing over a submerged object. A V pointing upstream means water is breaking around an object. The seams will form along the edges of these features. So by reading the surface, you can build a mental map of the bottom and predict exactly where those subtle, fish-holding seams are going to be. Now it's time for some myth busting. You've probably heard anglers talk about dead water, those big, slow, deep pools that look super fishy. And while fish do rest in these areas, they are often not the primary feeding zones. The myth is that this water is dead or empty. It's not. The most active fish will be located where that slow pool meets an incoming or outgoing current. Look for the gentle seam at the head of the pool where the faster water from a riffle dumps in. Or look at the tail out, where the pool funnels out and the current picks up again. The fish will line up on these transition zones, these seams, waiting for food to be delivered. Here's a common trap you need to avoid: false seams created by wind. On a breezy day, the wind can push the surface water around, creating lines and texture changes that look exactly like a current seam. It's easy to get fooled. So how do you tell the difference? Watch the bubbles or a floating leaf. If it's a true current seam, the object will travel along the line of the seam. If it's just a wind seam, the object will often get pushed across the line by the breeze, or it will move at the same speed as the water around it. Always confirm what you're seeing by observing how debris drifts. This simple check can save you from spending an hour fishing an empty spot created by the wind. Once you get good at spotting the main seams, it's time to level up and look for the seam within a seam. Let's say you have a large eddy behind a wing dam. There's the main obvious seam where the eddy meets the river. But look closer. Within that big eddy, there are often smaller, swirling microcurrents. There might be a secondary, much more subtle seam where the main backflow of the eddy meets a pocket of almost completely still water. These microseams often hold the biggest, smartest fish. While other anglers are pounding the main obvious edge, The dominant predator is often sitting on a much smaller, more subtle break that provides the perfect ambush point with even less effort. Let's talk about casting, because this is where most people get it wrong, even if they spot the seam. The amateur's mistake is to cast directly onto the seam or into the slow water. Imagine you're standing on the bank. You see a perfect seam 10 feet out. Many anglers will cast right on top of it. The problem is, your lure's splashdown can spook the fish, and you don't give the lure enough time to achieve the right depth and action. The fish are looking for food that is drifting naturally along that seam, not something that crash lands on their head. This is a small detail, but it makes a world of difference in your hookup ratio. So what is the correct approach? You need to cast upstream and across the seam. Your target landing spot should be several feet into the faster current, well above where you think the fish are holding. This accomplishes two critical things. First, the splashdown happens away from the fish, so you don't spook them. Second, it gives your lure or bait time to sink to the proper depth and begin to drift naturally before it ever reaches the target zone. You want the current to present your offering to the fish in the most realistic way possible. You're not just casting, you're setting up a natural drift. Once your cast is made, the next step is to let the current do the work. This is key for a perfect presentation. As your lure sweeps downstream in the faster current, it will naturally swing towards the seam where the water slows down. This is the moment of truth. Predatory fish see this as a bait fish or insect being swept from the fast current into their slack water feeding zone. It's a powerful, instinctive trigger. Your job is to maintain just enough contact with your lure to feel a bite, but not so much that you pull it unnaturally or drag it across the seam. The goal is a perfect natural drift right along that edge. A common question is, do seams exist in lakes and ponds? Absolutely. They are just created by different forces. Instead of a river's flow, you might have wind-driven current. On a windy day, water will circulate in a lake, creating faster and slower zones. A point of land sticking out will create a current break on its downwind side, forming a classic seam. Another major source is a feeder creek, or even a drainage pipe flowing into the lake. Where that moving water meets the still lake water, a seam is formed. These are fish magnets, so don't think this is just a river fishing tactic. Let's use a real-life example that everyone has seen, a bridge piling. This is a textbook seam factory. You have the main current hitting the front of the piling and splitting, creating seams on both sides. Then, you have the massive slack water pocket directly behind the piling. This creates two more seams where that slack water meets the current wrapping around the sides. That's 4 distinct fishable seams created by one single object. Most anglers will just cast into the big slack water area behind it. The pro looks at the front corners and the side seams, which are often where the most aggressive fish are positioned to get first dibs on the food. Now, let's scale that down. Imagine a single rock, maybe the size of a basketball, in the middle of a shallow riffle. It might not look like much, but that one little rock is doing the exact same thing as the giant bridge piling. It's creating a small pocket of slower water behind it, and on either side of that pocket are 2 tiny micro seams. A big trout might tuck its nose right into that little bit of slack water, completely hidden from the main current, waiting for a nymph to drift by. Learning to see and fish these tiny structures is what separates good anglers from great ones. No spot is too small to create a fish-holding seam. Does time of day affect how fish use these seams? It certainly does. During low light periods like dawn and dusk, fish often become more aggressive. They might move out of the slower water and cruise right along the edge of the seam, or even venture a little into the faster water to actively hunt. During the bright sun of midday, they are more likely to be tucked tightly into the slackest part of the current break, seeking shelter and only moving to ambush the most opportunistic meals. So you might fish the same seam, but you'll adjust your presentation. In the morning, a faster retrieve along the edge. At noon, a slower, more delicate drift. So let's put it all together. From now on, when you approach a river, don't just look for spots. I want you to look for lines. Your new river map is not made of pools and riffles. It's made of seams. Scan the water for changes in texture, for bubble lines, for the subtle signs of submerged structure. Trace these seams with your eyes and visualize where a fish would sit to get a free meal. Plan your approach and your cast to deliver your lure along that line naturally. When you start thinking in terms of seams instead of spots, you stop fishing where the fish might be, and you start fishing exactly where the active feeding fish have to be. It's that simple, and it's that powerful. So, to wrap this all up, the biggest takeaway is this. The most aggressive, actively feeding fish in any moving water system will almost always be positioned along a current seam. It's not the fast water, and it's not the slow water. It is the edge. The truly mind-blowing moment, the what it a pоворot, as they say, is when you realize you've been looking at these seams your whole life but never truly seeing them. They were just part of the scenery. Now they are the entire map. This changes your whole approach to fishing. You're no longer guessing. You are making calculated presentations to high percentage areas based on the simple laws of physics and fish behavior. It's the difference between hoping for a lucky day and creating a consistently successful one. Thank you so much for watching. If this video helped you see the water in a new way, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, I have a question for you all. What's the most subtle sign you have ever noticed on the water that led you to catching a great fish? Share your story in the comments below. Let's all learn from each other's experiences.